Hi everyone, it's Don and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Well, Holland America has changed a port on one of its transatlantic cruises and it's causing an awful lot of headaches. We also have the start of the Ruby Princess class action suit lawsuit. And we have a third ship being added to the World Cup. And if they're going to add ships, somebody else thought about adding ships as well. That's right. The other day I mentioned that some people were having a hard time. Their cruise was changed because of the World Cup. They're not allowed to get off unless they have tickets, so the cruise changed directions. That city, Qatar, already hired 2 cruise ships to work as temporary hotels. They're so busy now they've had to add a 3rd cruise ship to the mix as well, just to handle the amount of people heading to the World Cup. And also, just the other day I mentioned, hey, Liverpool is having Eurovision in 2023, and all of a sudden the hotel prices started to jump. Well, guess what? Many of the hotels are already sold out and booked. Well, what do you do when all the hotels get booked? You look at renting cruise ships again. I don't know about you guys, but before the pandemic, I tend to only remember cruise ships being looked at for like natural disasters like hurricanes or floods or something along those lines. I don't remember them being hired on the amount of scale that we're seeing these days for sporting events and concerts and migration and all. It just seems to be the thing to do nowadays. Hire a cruise ship if you don't have enough hotels in your area or housing. Weird. It's just since the pandemic. I don't remember that happening before. Also, Holland America, the Oosterdam, is leaving on November 5th out of Barcelona on a transatlantic cruise. Sounds lovely, sounds wonderful. I'm heading on a transatlantic cruise myself in a couple days. It's going to be a blast. Luckily for me, this didn't happen. They had to change the disembarkation port. That's right, they're not changing a port along the way, they're changing where you're getting off the ship. So instead of going into Fort Lauderdale, they're now going to go into Miami. Now, grant you, Miami is just a fairly short distance away, but if you have flights or have arranged travel or hotels, you're now arriving in a different city. Now, if you went through the cruise line, they are helping you with the flights and the hotels and things like that. However, if you booked your own independent travel afterwards, like airfare or a bus or scheduled or anything else, you have to make your own way. And this is causing some headaches for a lot of people. Not only that, a transatlantic cruise, quite often because you're coming from across Europe, the disembarkation through the process of customs can be much longer than a Caribbean. Often, it won't be facial recognition like you see nowadays when you get off in many areas. It'll be guys sitting there and ladies sitting there at customs bringing you in and going through your passport and checking all your details, which means it could take a lot longer to disembark. And if it takes longer to disembark and then it takes longer to get to your airport, you may miss your flight. So yeah, that's an interesting one out there. Some people aren't happy. Luckily, you didn't go to Port Canaveral. Imagine that, like 5 hours down the road. And now we have that class action lawsuit going on in Australia about the Ruby Princess. But before I get there, let me just invite you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. If you want to keep up to date with all things cruising, from disembarkation ports changes to tips and tricks and money-saving ideas. We talk about everything here about cruising on the channel, hopefully in an entertaining way, and every once in a while I even get into a rant about something, but I try to keep it as lighthearted as I can. I hope you'll join us by hitting the button. It really does help the channel out, and again, I'd really appreciate it. Okay, well, the Ruby Princess set sail on March 5th, 2020, and had to turn back part way through because it had a lot of cases of COVID on board. The government at the time decided to just let everybody off the ship in Sydney, and we all know what happened. It spread across the country. Numerous people were all linked to having contacted or contacted someone who had contact with somebody who was on the ship. It became a mess. A lot of people, quite a few people actually passed away because we didn't know how to treat it back then. We didn't know what we were doing. And so it was a very, very serious thing. And people have launched a class action suit. Well, the two lawyers got to state out what their case and their arguments are going to be basically ahead of time, their opening arguments. And the plaintiffs, well, let's start with the defendants have come out and that they said that the ship set sail on that date. At that time, there was no government required for screening of any passengers. There was no international shutdown of travel anywhere in the world. And the world was still trying to figure out what COVID was, and it was not, at that particular time, a world emergency yet. And they said through the world, there were only reported about 80,000 cases worldwide at the time, and the vast majority of them were still in China. That was the defendant's opening argument. The plaintiff's opening argument came out and said that the cruise line should have known that this was happening. They failed to protect the passengers. They did not have enough medical masks on board for all the passengers once the outbreak took hold, and so it was their fault. I don't know about you, but I remember all this happening back then. I was covering it quite extensively here on the channel, and nobody knew what was going on. First of all, at first they thought it was spread by touch, if you remember. It was touch. No one thought it was airborne. So to have masks on board, at the time, no one would think about having masks on board for 2,800 people and various days. That wasn't even something that would be considered anywhere in the world. I got news for you. Our hospitals here in Canada didn't have enough masks once COVID hit. So how do you expect cruise ships to have enough masks for everybody on board? They are right when they say there was no screening process. There was no ban on international travel. That's true as well. I don't know. The arguments right now are not looking very promising for the plaintiffs from what we've seen, but who knows? They may have a lot of facts that'll come out, a lot of things, but it's hard to tell because remember, no one knew what this was. Absolutely no one knew at this time what it was, except for maybe a few scientists somewhere in China who first discovered this stuff. So I don't know how this is going to go. We'll hear more and more about the case as it goes on. I'll update every once in a while when something breaking happens or a big story comes out, like, oh wow, that made a whole difference. Or we might find out this doesn't last very long at all in court. We'll see what happens. Well, let me know what you guys think. Do you think it was entirely the cruise? They should have had enough masks on board for everybody? If we found out that it was spread by touch and not by air, after the fact, right? Because the cruise ship the people had already left the cruise ship. Does that mean the cruise ships should have had surgical masks, surgical gloves for every passenger in storage, just in case? Is that the way our buildings and our governments and our stores and our restaurants and our theme parks, and everybody should have had all that on prepared just in case? It sounded like a very flimsy argument to me when I was listening to the readouts of it. But hey, I wasn't there. It might have been more substantial than what the highlights of the text are from the case, but it's not seeming too damning at the current time. Well, I hope you appreciate this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Want to see more tips, more tricks, more travel vlogs from around the world? Hit that subscribe button. Till next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.